At Team Toyota, they've been selling and servicing new and used Toyotas in your community for over 50 years. And you can reserve your next new Toyota with them today. You'll get a realistic timeline, and even in this crazy market, they won't charge you over MSRP. Or don't wait at all. With over 75 certified Toyotas, including a bunch of RAV4 and Highlanders, you can drive one home today. And you can always trust them to maintain your current vehicle. Their service and collision centers are high-tech, comfortable, and will save you time and money. Team Toyota can help you go anywhere you want, but they'll always be your hometown team. Just visit teamtoyota.net and choose from 3 locations in Langhorne, Glen Mills, or Princeton. Hello and welcome to the Phillies Talk podcast. I'm Corey Seidman and he's Jim Salisbury, and the longest season in Phillies history is over. It went all the way through November 5th, but that's where it ended, with the Phillies falling to the Astros in Game 6 of the World Series. There's a lot to talk about, Jim. There's the decision Rob Thomson made to pull Zack Wheeler in the 6th inning, which will be debated all offseason. Wheeler had been at just 70 pitches and was mostly cruising. There's the fact that the Phillies offense went ice cold the final 3.5 games of the World Series, really from the midpoint of that 7-0 Game 3 through the end, they just did not hit. And there's the fact that they had a lead in this World Series. You know, they kind of changed the expectation within the series itself by jumping out to a 1-0 lead and a 2-1 lead. But I think at the end of the day, the better team won, and the Astros were celebrating on their home field.
Yeah, the Astros had a big celebration down there Saturday night. It really struck me. So many things struck me. We were at that ballpark like 33 days earlier, and the Phillies had a raucous celebration in that very clubhouse in Houston after clinching a postseason berth, first time in 10 years, ending a drought, ending a burden. I mean, the weight of that drought, weighed on the entire franchise from ownership on down, and it was really carried by this group of players this year because there were such high expectations and a high payroll, and I thought they had trouble dealing with the weight of it all in the month of September, but they got to October. They had an unbelievable run, a great run in the month of October. Obviously, it ended in disappointment, but, walking in that clubhouse, I should say walking out of that clubhouse Saturday night, just kind of taking one last look around. And like I said, 33 days earlier, they had a raucous, champagne-drenched celebration with joy and relief and catharsis and emotion in that room. And then, 33 days later or whatever it was, they had a lot of emotion in that room of disappointment and I'm sure regret. But it just, as I looked at a handful of guys, Hoskins and Schwarber, Stubbs, Vierling, Castellanos, Bohm. I mean, you saw them over there in the corner and they were kind of having a beer and talking and reflecting and decompressing. And it reminded me a little bit of a moment that, unfortunately, I think a lot of us have experienced in our lives. And I don't mean to get too deep here, but, sometimes you go to a funeral and then maybe you have a beloved family member and who has passed away after a great life. And you retreat back to the home and you're all kind of sitting there and you're kind of sad, and all of a sudden somebody tells a funny old story and all of a sudden there's a laugh and there's a smile and you get appreciative for, what you had. And that's what that scene in the clubhouse kind of reminded me of. They were very sad, and then all of a sudden you heard a chuckle and somebody said, yeah, that was one of my favorite points of the season. And it was like just a bunch of guys remembering a loved one. In this case, the loved one was that run they had from, I would say, June 1 on. And terrific memory. That word resilience gets thrown around a lot and was attached to this club a lot, to the point where it's almost a cliche, but they really showed it in the overcoming a tough start, overcoming injuries. They had a great run, and they really electrified the town in the month of October. Maybe not during the season because there was only 3 sellouts, but it was nice to see this group of guys kind of shake this town by the lapels and make it believe and love baseball again. And that was kind of my lasting thought walking out of there. I mean, at the start of the series, I didn't think they were the best team. I thought the Astros were going to be a very tough out, and indeed they were. They won the World Series. But you're right about the expectations changing during, you go up 2-1, you think, wow, they got a chance, and then they're no hit. I mean, what a drastic, emphatic statement I thought the Astros made, even though it wasn't like a classic no-hitter with one guy seeing it through. I thought that lacked drama for that reason, but it was an emphatic moment in the series. And then, they get that great catch from McCormick, and you could feel the tide turning. And then ultimately they put it away on their home field after the Phillies got a 1-run lead, and we'll debate that moment in the 6th inning now and probably forever in Philadelphia, because that's what sports fans do, and it's their right. People get emotionally invested in this stuff, and they get angry, and they feel emotion, and they debate it, and they talk about it, and they talk about it forever. So though I think it was ultimately a disappointment for the Phillies to be so close yet so far, there were just a lot of – I think they made a lot of great memories for people, but it's okay if you're disappointed that it didn't work out the way you had hoped at the end.
Well, it's pretty incredible, Jim. So we're sitting here on November 7th. The first Phillies playoff game of this run was October 7th, a calendar month ago. Feels closer to like 6 months ago, just based on everything they've been through since, the comeback in Game 1 in St. Louis, the way that the NLDS against the Braves played out, the dominance of the NLCS at home, the way the first 3 games of this World Series. There were guys who were heroes early in the playoff run that kind of dwindled as the run continued. The Phillies didn't hit enough, regardless of whether Zack Wheeler was pulled in the 6th inning of Game 6 or not. I mean, they scored just the 1 run. They went 9 for 98, hitting .092 in the final 30 innings of the World Series. Really, at the end there, it was just, is Kyle Schwarber going to hit a home run? Is Bryce Harper going to do something special? Because there weren't enough other hitters in the lineup who were contributing. You had Rhys Hoskins, who went 1 for his final 19 with 11 strikeouts. JT Realmuto hit that ball very hard that Chas McCormick caught, which really changed the complexion of this World Series. If that ball goes for a triple, if the Phillies have a very good chance to go up 3-2 in the World Series, and then anything's possible. So the guys that, there wasn't enough offense around those 2 left-handed hitters who did it much of the season. And obviously the decision to pull Wheeler didn't help. Jose Alvarado had gotten hit earlier in the World Series, so it's not as if he was still on that same magical run that he had been riding for like 3.5 months. And the thing with Wheeler is just that, he looked so dominant. He looked so dominant the other night. He was throwing 98, 99 early and consistently. He hadn't allowed much hard contact. I know there was a ball hit up the middle in that final inning of work, but Wheeler had just been cruising. He was at 70 pitches. And, the other part of that decision was that it was the 6th inning of the game. That left-handed pocket was going to come up again later. So you were wasting one of your left-handed bowlers. There were just enough reasons to kind of question the decision in the moment. And obviously it's been second-guessed to death since then.
Well, I think they had a left-handed answer later on in the game. They were going to go with Suarez. You had to win that game. We'll debate the move that Rob Thomson made, and we'll debate it forever. He made similar moves throughout the postseason. He was very aggressive in going to, Alvarado for kind of a kill shot early in the game, midway through the game, I should say. And he kind of stuck with that plan that had worked for him. And, the only way a move turns out to be the right move is if the player executes the move. If he sticks with Zack Wheeler there, and Wheeler gives up a one-hopper off the wall in left center, people are going to say, why didn't you go with Alvarado, right? Like you've done the whole postseason at that moment. If Alvarado comes in and induces a pop-up from Yordan Alvarez, Rob Thomson is going to be hailed for making the right move. And if they somehow hold that, lead because of that aggressiveness in the 6th inning, he'll be hailed as as making a good move. The player needs to execute the move. The move can be thought out, and this indeed was thought out. Now, it was probably thought out in Clearwater because I think this is a team that, even go back to when Gabe Kapler first arrived and his first game when they took out Aaron Nola at 68 pitches in Houston. In Atlanta that day. This was a team that was going to, middle of the game, big left-handed spot, they were going to go to it and kind of mix and match their way through games. That's what we're seeing in modern baseball that is dictated a lot by front offices and numbers and analytics, and the Phillies are true to that, and they were true to that in this game. Sometimes during the season, I think Thomson operated with more feel in the moment there, but once you got into the postseason, it became, you're managing in the short term, not necessarily the big picture. And the move didn't work. And it's obviously going to be criticized. He had his reasons, and ultimately it did not work. I don't know why anybody was surprised he made that move. I mean, he popped out of the dugout, had his finger up immediately. Alvarado was up, and he had done it the whole postseason. Even the players on the diamond weren't surprised. Hoskins said so. But it didn't work. If there was ever a night to maybe manage with some feel and observe the situation, it might have been this night when Wheeler was just absolutely throwing gas and it was crackling, had great stuff, and you trust him. But if that blew up in his face, then he's going to be second guessed on that. And if it didn't blow up in his face and Alvarado, doesn't or whatever, he's going to be second guessed either way unless a player executes there. So that is what happened. And we'll second guess it for a long time. It's not an easy job managing a baseball team. It becomes a lot easier when your players perform. And Yordan Alvarez was due. He had seen Jose Alvarado, and he got him, hit it 450 feet, and that was the ball game. Life went out of that dugout after that.
Well, one of the big factors in this series that probably doesn't get talked about enough in the city that loses is that the Astros bullpen was dynamite in this World Series. They really stepped up. They really only used 4 key guys: Ryan Presley, Brian Abreu, Rafael Montero, and Hector Neris. They combined for 16 2/3 innings and allowed 1 earned run with a ton of strikeouts. It's like they would come in after the starter, and as successful as the Astros starters were for much of this series, the bullpen just kept it going. Whereas, as we just mentioned, Jose Alvarado slipped a couple of times in this series. The Phillies afterward, they were asked all sorts of ways. What do you think went wrong for the offense? Why didn't you guys hit over the final 3.5 games? And a lot of credit was given to the Astros pitching staff. You look at the numbers, it was an insane year for the Astros pitching staff. They had a whip collectively of just over 1 as a team. So you knew that there were going to be some good arms that they were sending out there. And really, from the moment that Christian Javier took the mound in Game 4 on, everybody that stepped on the hill for the Astros stifled the Phillies' bats.
Yeah, I think what we saw is they have a lot of power arms, and the Phillies have a lot of big swings, and that's not a good mix. Phillies struck out 71 times, World Series record throughout the series. The guy they did hit, Verlander hit a wall in that 5th inning. He's 39 years old of the first game, and they hit him. They hit him when he made mistakes over the plate, when he was pitching from the stretch. And then they hit Lance McCullers Jr., who was, leaving breaking balls over the plate. But otherwise, they faced a lot of good power, including in Verlander in that final game. And they faced, premium high-octane late in games out of the bullpen. And you just got a lot of guys up there who are looking to, hit the ball over the wall. And if you're not doing that, it can look ugly, and strikeouts can pile up. And that's what happened to the Phillies. So much more went into this series loss than one 6th inning decision that blew up in the manager's face. A decision that he had made similarly earlier in the series and earlier in the postseason that worked. He was managing in the short term. It blew up in his face. But there are a lot of other reasons they lost this series, and I have to put it on the offense. They didn't get any big hits, but the swings are big, and you're facing that premium velocity, and that's not a good mix. The Phillies are not a team that really manufactures runs, that's what happened. So. Earlier in the series, they had occasions in the postseason, they had occasions when they did manufacture runs, like that day in St. Louis, though the opposing closer certainly was an accomplice to that. And they had other moments when they feasted on long balls, like the win over McCullers, like the day they, Harper's go-ahead blast in the NLCS. So ultimately, they lost the series for a lot of reasons. And you can even put defense in there. Defense probably cost them 2 runs in Game 5. And at least they're consistent because defense cost them games all season, sprinkled about. Not maybe as many as in the previous 2 seasons, but defense certainly cost them games. Ultimately they get in 87 wins, third place team because there's an extra spot. They play in a tough division. They were the NL East is a tough division. You got Cy Young winners, you got really good teams in the Braves and Mets. I don't think the Phillies were as much underdogs as a lot of people think they were with that payroll and that level of talent. But I do think once they got to the World Series, they were the second best team in that World Series, and it played out that way. I think the best team won because the best team executed and out-executed the Phillies.
Yeah, defensively, I mean, you just think about the important plays the Astros made. Trey Mancini stopping that ball off the bat of Kyle Schwarber a half inning after he enters as a defensive replacement, playing defense for the first time in like 3 weeks, and he makes that play. McCormick, the ball up against the wall in right center. One thing I will say is that something that stuck out to me in Game 6, Alec Boehm continued to make like every play hit at him. There were some difficult plays hit his way. He wasn't a liability in this World Series defensively. I mean, he didn't commit an error dating back to Game 1 of the NLCS. So, he had a good run defensively there to end things. There's going to be a lot of questions about the Phillies offense, coming off of that series. But I think the biggest question is going to be the availability early next season of Bryce Harper, who played only 8 games in the field this season because of the elbow issue that he's been dealing with. So where does the Harper situation stand, Jim? When do you think that we're going to know whether he's going to require surgery or what the deal is going to be with his timeline?
Yeah. If I can just say about Boehm, one of the most improved players in the course of a season that I've ever seen in his play, in his demeanor, his confidence level, even as you can almost see him become a man because it was a very trying spring training for him. You didn't know if he was going to get traded, demoted, lose his job. I mean, he was skittish, unconfident, looking over his shoulder. And at the end, he was one of the dudes, So great job by him. Very, very impressed in all the intangibles he showed. As far as Harper, getting back to your question, which is obviously a very important one, they're lucky they had the DH this year because he was able to keep contributing with a tear in his elbow that if he was still playing defense and there was no DH, that would have knocked him out of the lineup because he wasn't able to throw. All season long, they've been targeting, right after the season ends, he's going to be evaluated to see where the tear is in his elbow, if there's been any healing, how much healing, an MRI at that point, likely other evaluating procedures, whatever they do there, to just determine if he needs surgery to fix it. And then once you determine if he needs surgery and you move forward, you got to get in there and actually see the extent of the injury to know if you're going to do Tommy John surgery, if you're going to do a lesser procedure called an internal brace. So, first things first, does he need surgery? Second thing, okay, if you're in there now, what kind of surgery do you have to do? And then you move from there. If it's full-blown Tommy John surgery, he might miss some early part of next season because they played an extra month, right? But he might be able to contribute next season because he's not a pitcher and the recovery for pitchers is not as long, and because he proved he can swing a bat with a bad right elbow. If it's Tommy John, we'll find out. If it's another procedure called an internal brace, which is sometimes called Tommy John Light. Rhys Hoskins had it in October of 2020 and was back in spring training. So it's like a 4 to 6 month recovery. So whatever the recovery is, if he has the surgery, it'll affect his throwing, but he might be able to come back as a hitter sooner. So they're going to dig into that this week. I've been told he'll have an MRI this week and they'll get it going and see what he needs because they need to act quickly because he doesn't want to miss too much time next year. We know how important he is. And kind of that's that. I mean, they got something they can build on here coming off this postseason, all that good experience. And they don't want to miss him too much next year, though they missed him 2 months this year and they survived. So that's where that stands. The sun came up Monday morning and now they have to deal with Bryce Harper's elbow. I would think they are also going to take a good long look at Zack Wheeler because he had the elbow issue late in the season. He had the fatigue in the postseason. They're going to have to come up with a plan there. If he's uninjured, as he says he is, says he's fine, but they're going to have to come up with a plan to get him the recovery he needs. And then when do you start ramping up and building for the new season? Because we know how vital he is. And Aaron Nola, the same thing. So just because it ended Saturday night in Houston doesn't mean it's over. We're into evaluating health and getting recovery so they can try to build on this next season. So we should have I think we'll have an answer on something on Harper this week. I do. I think we'll know some more, and it might be quiet. They play this stuff very close to the vest, but that is my understanding on how that they planned on proceeding.
The Phillies went 32-20 in those games that Harper missed. I mean, that was really the key to the season. If they don't, not only maintain their level without Harper, but play really good baseball without him, they don't make the playoffs. They don't go on that run. But they certainly don't want to, test that again next year by missing him for such a big chunk of the season. Thinking about some of these pitchers, you see it all the time, the World Series hangover, whether it's the team that wins or loses, just the fact that everybody played an extra month. And some of these pitchers, Aaron Nola, who leads all of Major League Baseball in innings over the last 5 years, threw 26 more innings in the playoffs. So he ended this season at 231 innings, excluding spring training. So you think that, it's going to be, his ramp-up process, as you mentioned, could be different. The situation with Wheeler, I mean, he looked like he was healthy in Game 6, didn't he? I mean, throwing 97, 98, 99 at that point in the season seemed like a statement.
Absolutely. I mean, we were wondering if he was 100% healthy 5 days earlier, and he came out of that game. I looked over the first pitch, 99, second pitch, 99, third pitch, slider, next pitch, 99. So you're like, wow. Now, you see that in the first inning, you're like, okay, maybe it's adrenaline, but he carried it, he carried it. So maybe it was just fatigue and he had one last blast in him. I don't know, but it still concerns me that he missed time late in the season with elbow tendonitis. So I think it's just a crucial offseason for him to get right and get healthy and get strong and get some recovery time. And this offseason, thank goodness, is going to be 5 weeks shorter. And that's what you want. You want to play in October, right? The season got pushed back a week, and then you played a month of postseason. That's 5 weeks of recovery time that the guys who don't get into the postseason get. So they're just going to have to be smart with Wheeler and Nola and getting their guys recovery, and I'm sure they will be. I mean, I think about how important recovery is in the offseason. You look at Madison Bumgarner, who was the horse that helped the Giants win 3 World Series. On his shoulders, and just the load he carried, pitching an extra month of high intensity. And I think it probably caught up with him later in his career. But the reason you play this game is to put rings on your finger. I don't he put 3 of them on his finger. I don't think anybody will change that, including him. So they just have to be smart about this stuff. And, it starts with Harper. We're sitting here on Monday, November 7th at 12:30 in the afternoon, and I'm sure they are digging in on Harper right now.
Well, with Wheeler, beyond the velocity that he showed in Game 6 of the World Series, the spin on his slider and curveball was also up significantly compared to his regular season average, which is just one other thing that might speak to his elbow being in okay shape. But, we'll see as this offseason progresses. Jim, the Phillies have some decisions to make. So there's players become free agents the day after the World Series. There's that 5-day window where you can re-sign your own guys. There's the 5-day window to decide whether you're going to pick up options or not. The Phillies hold options on Gene Segura and Zach Eflin, both right around $15 million. Would think that they're probably not going to exercise either one.
I would agree. I would agree. As much as, you need pitching, and pitching is so valuable, it's very difficult to, with the injury history Eflin has had, I don't see them picking up that for $15 million. Maybe they try to work out something else because, him. You need pitching, but it's a shame because he was looking probably at a really big payday if he didn't have more knee issues this season. So I don't know where that's going to go. I'd expect him to test the market and possibly, move on, but I don't see them picking up that $15 million option. And Segura, I think they'll move on from him. With him and Didi Gregorius exiting, that's $30 million you're opening up the middle. That could be the pursuit of a Trey Turner, somebody like that, or a Carlos Rodon pitcher, power left-handed pitcher, because they got a taste of it this year. And not only did the players get a taste of it, ownership got another taste of it. I mean, they were all around when they had this great run from 07 to 11 and won a World Series in 08 and went back in 09. The ownership group was there, was intact. But this, John Middleton was not the managing partner then. He was still more in the background. He has become the managing partner, and he's made his championship desires well known. So I think he got a taste of it. I don't think he's going to be holding back. You got Bryce Harper still here. You got Real Muto. You got Wheeler, Nola. They're going to be looking to augment this this nucleus and try to build on this and try to win a World Series next year. So they have a history of big free agent moves in the last handful of years, and I'm not expecting them to sit on their hands. Like I said, John Middleton's hungry. You got a president of baseball operations, Dave Dombrowski, who did not come here in his mid-60s with his resume to finish in second place and walk out of stadiums with disappointment, finishing second in the World Series. He wants to win it. So I think they're going to be aggressive and do something big. I really do.
Well, I mean, they've said over the years, John Middleton's saying that they would exceed the luxury tax when they feel like there's the right opportunity to make
They did. They did.
the luxury tax this past offseason, and then they saw the team make a run, which should only embolden them to, at least hit that same number they were at next year, if not exceed it. So beyond Segura and Eflin coming off the books, you have Corey Knebel, who made $10 million. As you referenced, Didi Gregorius made $15 million. Now officially he's gone off the books. Odubel Herrera, Juris Familia, Syndergaard and David Robertson, Kyle Gibson, Brad Hand, Johan Camargo. So you add all those guys together, it's an estimated $75 million that the Phillies would have to play with. And, Trey Turner's been a guy that has been connected to the Phillies for months now. Bryce Harper's made comments about him, obviously a former teammate in Washington. A lot of smoke there. I know that there's a ton of offseason to go here, and there's going to be cycles of rumors and, the way things develop. This guy's going to get offers that probably near $300 million, if not more. Do you think it's a legit possibility for the Phillies?
Yeah, I do. They need a leadoff man. You could move Stott to second. And you got one of the most exciting players in baseball, so multi-dimensional, does so many things well. I think he wants to play back on the East Coast. He'd be a phenomenal fit. He's a tremendous player, as we saw for a long time in Washington. I think he's the kind of hitter this lineup could really use near the top. It would be a great score for this team. But you still need pitching, so you have to decide where you're going to spend your resources. Wheeler and Nola are not getting any younger. They're going to need help. As, Eflin and Gibson move on, and it would be nice to maybe add – it would be nice to add another top pitcher to that Wheeler, Nola, Suarez group. And then, you have youngsters coming, and Andrew Painter, who I fully expect to be here at some point next year. I don't know if it's day 1, day 10, or day 50, but I expect him to be here at some time next year. I think Griff McGarry's here at some point next year. Whether or not he throws enough strikes to stay, we'll see. I think Mick Gable is a little bit behind those guys, but who knows? We've seen guys, come to the fore in a heartbeat. So there's some good arms below, but I still think they need more starting pitching, quality starting pitching, top-level starting pitching, and it would be great if they could get Trey Turner. I just think he'd be a phenomenal fit. Bryson Stott goes to short, could go to second, and then you kind of go from there and give you your best shot. You got the Braves, who are still, in my opinion, loaded. And you got the Mets, who are really good and really talented, and have a owner that is very, very hungry. It's almost like the American League East used to be, this National League East. A lot of keeping up with the Joneses. Off seasons are exciting. Then you got to go out and do it during the season. But you have front offices and ownership groups that all want to win, and it's going to be the competition next year is going to be fierce. And I expect it to be pretty fierce as well this winter.
Yeah, and because of those reasons, the Phillies can't let up. Something that I've been thinking about the last couple of days is that whenever a team loses a World Series, loses a Super Bowl, loses in the NBA Finals, you almost always hear key players from that team talk about, we're going to be back next year. We're going to be, but it's so rarely the case. Like it was the case for the 2014 Royals, who lost to the Giants in the World Series, made it back the next year and beat the Mets in the World Series. But that's the exception. It's difficult to get where the Phillies got this year. I mean, as evidenced by all the good fortune that it required for them to reach that point. So they can't sit on their hands. They can't come back with the same team. They had some weaknesses that got exposed throughout this playoff run. A major consideration, too, is what Nick Castellanos is going to be able to bring you offensively, because it's almost like as productive a year as it was for Kyle Schwarber, the way that Castellanos did not live up to expectations offensively almost like balanced it out. You need more out of that bat. You were expecting that he was going to hit like 290 plus with power behind Bryce Harper. That never really materialized. And talking about all these pitchers, as you pointed out all throughout the playoff run, they kept advancing without a fourth starter. Yeah. So if they make it back to October, perhaps they'll be in a better position rotationally.
Yeah. The guys in that room talked a lot about how they think this is a building block and how they can get back there. But a successful team, a successful franchise organization is always tweaking. I look back to the Yankees from 1996 until 96, maybe through like 01 or 02, when they had that great run. Every year they would always churn that roster a little bit, tweak it a little bit in the offseason. You had the core guys, but they would keep tweaking, and they would add guys that could fill holes where they thought they'd need them, but they also add guys who still had that hunger, something to play for. So I always thought the Yankees did a great job tweaking, bringing in new talent, bringing in guys who are hungry for a ring. Obviously, the Phillies have a second place ring, but I do think I do think they can't ignore their shortcomings, and they need to go out and fill them. And I think they will. Dave Dombrowski is not going to ignore this team's shortcomings. He knows that they struggle on defense. He knows that they could probably use more contact in the lineup. But I expect him to try to address those issues. I mean, I think he'll make people available for trades and gauge interest in a Castellanos. He'll gauge interest in a Hoskins. I'm not saying they're going to move, but I think he'd be open to everything if it inches this thing forward. You walk around that room. He walked around that room and shook everybody's hand after that game. But his obligation is to improve that roster. And if it means saying goodbye to some people, that's what you have to do. I expect the nucleus of the roster to be very similar in Clearwater, but I do expect there to be changes. And I think there has to be changes if you're going to keep up with the Mets and the Braves and actually use this as a stepping stone, all the stuff you accomplished this year.
I guess, Jim, my last question today, since, keep in mind, we're going to be here all throughout the offseason talking about the developments in Phillies land, but how do you think this team's going to be remembered? They gave us a run that nobody expected. They went into the World Series as underdogs, then became favorites with the way they played early in the series, and then they obviously weren't able to pull it out. Do you think they'll be remembered similarly to the 1993 Phillies, who also kind of came out of nowhere to advance as far as they did?
I think it's possible. I think it's really important, though, that they build on this next year and have another good season and after that, because they have superstars in the lineup that are, not getting any younger. And when Bryce Harper came here, it was incumbent. They got to win a World Series at some point when he's here, and they got to do it in his prime. So I think this season could be seen as a year that made the town fall in love with the Phillies again, or a month, I should say, that made the town fall in love with the Phillies again, because there was only 3 sellouts during the regular season, and then 8 of them came in the postseason. So a month where everybody fell in love with the Phillies again, and but it's important for the Phillies to keep that love a flicker and keep the pilot light on by playing well again next year and the year after. And I think the front office is going to do everything they can to facilitate that with moves this winter. And then, you got to go out there and play well. I think ultimately this team will be remembered fondly. I know I'll remember it fondly. I really enjoyed covering this team. I really enjoyed seeing Aaron Nola, pitch that clincher in Houston a month ago. And I know his detractors will say he didn't pitch well in the postseason. What are you going to do? I can't help that. But I enjoyed seeing this team make a step and get there. And then they went in the postseason longer than I think we all thought they would. But in a lot of ways, it was like 07. You get there, learn from it, and they got to build on that step and take another step next year. And that's going to be hard because you got to the World Series. But It was a good story, and they're still looking for a great story. I guess that's the way I'll look at it. It's really important they build on this next year, but I think in the short term they reawakened everybody to how great it is to have a Phillies team or a baseball team that's relevant and making a great postseason run, and now they have to keep it going. There was a lot of disappointment about the way it ended. I know it's tough being a big league manager. Sometimes you think about a move all day long and it's the absolute right move and it blows up in your face. Sometimes you make a move that nobody can believe and it goes well. It comes down to the player executing, and one pitch didn't get executed, and then everybody walked out the door feeling lousy. But once the dust settles, I think you feel better, and maybe they can build on this next year.
Yeah, it was one of the wildest rides in Philly sports history. Now it's over. We want to thank you, everybody who's out there listening to the Phillies Talk podcast or watching on YouTube, for joining us on this ride throughout October and November, really dating all the way back to February when we were doing these daily Phillies Talk podcasts as spring training began in Clearwater. So thanks a lot for listening all season. And as we mentioned, we'll be here throughout the offseason regularly as there are more things to discuss, as free agency begins, as rumors swirl, as the Phillies are connected to some of these top free agents. So stay tuned. Be on the lookout for more Phillies Talk podcasts to come.